Hello, Mr. Saloger here, stopping in to talk to you guys about wind erosion. First big idea we want to understand is that wind erosion is dominant in two main places. And those places are deserts and beaches. And the reason why is because we've got lots of loose sediment near the surface in both of those locations. It was also a big problem in the 1930s in what we call the Dust Bowl, which occurred in the Great Plains of the United States. The big reason why we had a problem with wind erosion during the Dust Bowl is we had lots of loose sediment near the surface. And the big reason for that was over tilling the land. We can see a modern tractor tilling the land and loosening up all the sediment, which is then being blown away by the wind here. Another reason for the Dust Bowls was that there was a long period of drought, which caused crop failure. Once you had crop failure, you had these loose sediments that were not being protected by the roots, and it was able to be blown away. Once the topsoil is blown away with all the organic matter, nothing was going to grow in the sediment. In some places, you had dominantly erosion where the sediment was being blown away. In other locations, you had deposition where once the wind slowed down, it was depositing those sediments. And here you can see this farm and this tractor is being buried in windblown sand and silt. One of the ways that we deal with this now is by creating shelter belts or windbreaks. And what we do is we plant trees along the edges of our farm fields, and that will act to slow down the wind and reduce the velocity. Anytime you increase the velocity, you're going to have more erosion. Anytime you decrease the velocity, you're going to have more deposition. We do the same thing with the snow in western New York State. We put fences on the western sides of the roads. And the main reason why we put them on the west side is we know that the wind is dominantly out of the southwest. So when the wind encounters these fences, it slows down the velocity. Anytime you slow the velocity, you're going to have more deposition, and you create a dune of sand here where in this case, it's not sand, it is snow that is being deposited, and it prevents it from going and drifting across the road and blocking the roadway. In deserts, we often encounter these strange pedestal or mushroom shaped rocks. And the reason for this is due to abrasion, which is primarily happening near the surface. In this case, it's the sand and silt that is being blown around by the wind, and the majority of those larger particles, like the sand that is doing the erosion, is moving around near the surface and eroding away near the base of this rock structure. This just shows you the power of sandblasting, which of course we know we call that abrasion in earth science. So this particular rock structure was created with the wider part on the top, this mushroom shape, because most of the sandblasting was happening near the base here. It can also happen because you have different rock layers that have varying degrees of resistance to erosion. If you have a less resistant layer to erosion, that will be worn away more, and a more resistant layer could be sticking out farther, like the top here. In this case, it's all the same rock type, so the way we explain that is by the majority of the sediment doing the sandblasting near the surface. Sand dunes are erosional and depositional landscape features in places where wind is the dominant agent of erosion. One of the big things we want you to know about sand dunes is that the wind is going to come up the gentle sloping side and then down the steep side. It is the exact opposite of drumlins, which we learned about during our glacial unit. On the beaches, you will often encounter sand dunes as well, and you might see some fencing like this if you visit a beach. The reason for that fencing is to help protect these sand dunes. These sand dunes help stabilize the beach. You see some dune grass here. We're trying to prevent people from walking all over the dune grass and destroying that because the roots of the dune grass help to hold the sand in place. During a storm or high tides, the water level may come up and wash against these sand dunes, and then that would erode the sand out into the ocean. By putting the fencing around here, that will slow the waves and it will prevent people from walking on the dunes, which will help hold all of that sand there, which protects the shorelines. Some other places you could go to see sand dunes, White Sands National Monument in New Mexico. You could go to Peru,